A cynical TV host mockingly questions the dog tag worn by action legend Steven Seagal. She expected a witty comeback. She got a story of a fallen brother that silenced the entire live studio and shattered her show. The invitation had arrived with the deceptive politeness of a veiled threat. The Hot Seat, television's premier arena for cynical takedowns and manufactured outrage, wanted to have a conversation with Steven Seagal. His publicist, a man named Marcus who'd seen every kind of media ambush, was blunt. "It's a trap, Steven. They're not inviting a guest, they're baiting a bear. They want you to swing back, give them their viral clip." Seagal, standing in his quiet, minimalist dojo, had simply looked out at the rain-streaked window. "Then maybe," he'd said, his voice a low rumble, "I'll give them something they didn't plan for." Now, sitting in the back of a black car slicing through the city, he was calm. He wasn't preparing sound bites or rehearsing anecdotes. His preparation was internal, centered around two objects tucked away in his travel bag. The first was a single, worn dog tag on a simple chain, its metal dulled with age. It had belonged to his older brother, a Marine lost in a jungle half a world away, decades ago. The second was an old, frayed black belt. It wasn't the pristine one he wore for formal demonstrations. This one was soft from 1,000 knots, stained with sweat, its fabric holding the memory of pain, discipline, and survival. He wasn't walking into the TV studio to perform or to fight. He was walking in armed with something far heavier, the unvarnished truth of his own history. The set of The Hot Seat was a masterpiece of cheerful hostility. Brightly colored couches, giant screens displaying the host's smiling face, and an audience expertly warmed up to laugh at the right moments and gasp on cue. It was a space designed to soften, sanitize, and ultimately control the narrative. Jenna Monroe, the show's star host, was a master of her domain. Sharp, witty, and with a reputation for verbally dismantling her guests with a smile, she greeted Seagal with practiced warmth. "Steven. An absolute honor to have you." The legend himself, in the flesh. Seagal, dressed in a simple dark silk shirt and black pants, his bearded face impassive, gave a slight nod and took his seat. The contrast was immediate and palpable, the show's loud, vibrant energy crashing against his wall of profound stillness. The interview began as predicted. Jenna circled him with playful but pointed jabs about his action movies, his tough guy persona, his often reclusive nature. "I mean, you've taken down armies on screen, but you're notoriously quiet in real life," she probed, leaning in. "What's the secret? Are you just plotting your next move?" The audience chuckled as expected. Seagal remained neutral. "There is a difference," he said, his voice low and calm, "between being quiet and having nothing to say." Jenna's smile widened. She sensed an opening, a chance to poke the bear and get the reaction her producers craved. She zeroed in on the faint glint of metal peeking from under his collar. The ambush was sprung. "Speaking of secrets," Jenna said, her tone shifting, becoming laced with a syrupy, theatrical curiosity. "I have to ask about that accessory." She gestured towards his neck. "That little dog tag. Is that a souvenir from one of your old movies? I thought Rambo hung all that up decades ago." The audience let out a wave of laughter, louder this time, sensing this was the gotcha moment. It was a perfect daytime TV jab, slightly edgy, a little condescending, designed to put the stoic action hero on the defensive. Jenna leaned back, satisfied, waiting for a witty retort or a gruff dismissal. She got neither. Seagal didn't flinch. He didn't scowl. His gaze, which had been resting calmly on her, sharpened with an intensity that made her smile feel suddenly brittle. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up, his large hand gently pulling the worn dog tag from beneath his collar. He let it rest in his palm, the dull metal catching the harsh studio lights. "This little piece of metal," he began, his voice dropping into a gravelly register that seemed to absorb all other sound in the room, "belonged to my brother, Sergeant Michael Seagal." The studio didn't just fall quiet. It collapsed. The laughter died in people's throats. A co-host shifted uncomfortably in their seat. A camera operator instinctively broke frame, a silent, "Oh no," on his face. "He died in a place most people on this panel can't pronounce," Seagal continued, his voice steady but loaded with unspoken history. "He wore this when he wrote his last letter home. He wore this when he prayed his last prayer." The room was now utterly still. The only sound was the faint hum of the studio lights, which suddenly felt too bright, too intrusive. Jenna Monroe stared, her witty follow-up questions turning to ash in her mouth. The bear hadn't swum back. It had simply shown its scars. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Jenna Monroe, a professional skilled at filling any void with chatter, was paralyzed. The script in her hand was useless, the story had veered into territory her show was not equipped to handle. Seagal let the silence do its work, let the weight of his words settle over the brightly colored set. Then, he leaned forward slightly. "I want to show you something else," he said, his voice calm, as if confiding in a friend, though his eyes held the entire studio captive. From beside his chair, he lifted a small, weathered canvas bag. It was the kind of bag that holds not just objects, but history. The audience leaned in. The director in the control room whispered into his headset, "Stay on him. Close up." Seagal unzipped the bag and pulled out not a weapon, not a movie prop, but a length of black fabric. It was an old, frayed black belt. The cotton was worn soft, its edges tattered, the fabric stained with the faint, ghostly imprints of sweat and time. It looked ancient, sacred. He held it in his open palms, not presenting it, but simply regarding it. "This isn't from a movie set either," he said. The room held its breath. "The week the military informed us my brother was gone," Seagal's voice was a notch lower now, almost a whisper, yet it carried to every corner of the silent studio, "I didn't know what to do with the noise inside. I couldn't speak. I couldn't cry. So I went to my dojo." He looked down at the belt. "I put this on. It was the first black belt I ever earned. And I trained. I moved through the forms until my knuckles bled, until my body was screaming, until there was nothing left inside but breath and motion." He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the stunned audience. "Every drop of sweat that soaked into this belt was a tear I couldn't shed. Every controlled movement was a prayer for a soul I couldn't bring back." He gently placed the old belt on the coffee table between him and Jenna. It rested there, a tangible piece of grief, a testament to a pain that had been disciplined into strength. "This," he said quietly, "is what kept me standing." The carefully constructed artifice of the hot seat had been shattered. The audience was no longer a passive receptacle for entertainment, they were witnesses. The space between the stage and the seats had vanished, replaced by a shared, palpable humanity. Then, from the far left corner of the studio, a man stood up. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, wearing a denim jacket, his hands weathered. A producer in the control room instinctively motioned to cut to a commercial, but the director held up a hand, whispering, "No. Let it roll." "He's not just an actor," the man said, his voice cracking with an emotion that was raw and real. All heads turned. "I trained at a gym in Philadelphia, back before Rocky was even a hit. He pointed a trembling finger at Seagal, would come in. We didn't know who he was, just some quiet guy with more heart than anyone else. He bled with us, he stayed late to talk to the kids from the neighborhood. We weren't just background actors to him. We were people." A murmur of realization rippled through the crowd. This wasn't a performance, it was a testimony. The man swallowed hard, his voice dropping. "I lost my own son in Fallujah. For years, I felt ashamed of the anger, the grief." He looked directly at Seagal now. "But seeing a man carry his pain without making it a spectacle, without asking for pity, that matters. Thank you, sir." He sat back down, and the silence that followed was filled with a profound, unspoken respect. Before the studio could fully resettle, another voice pierced the quiet. A young man, early 20s, hoodie, anxious hands twisting the hem of his shirt, rose slowly from his seat. I used to believe in things, he stammered, his voice shaking but gaining strength. God, purpose, all of it. Then my sister died last year, and it all felt like a sick joke. He locked eyes with Seagal. And then you talked about the belt. About turning pain into something else. I don't know if I believe again, he said, his voice cracking, but for the first time in a year, I think I want to try. Jenna Monroe was adrift. The show had been completely wrested from her control, not by force, but by the sheer, gravitational pull of authenticity. Her note cards, filled with witty zingers and pre-planned segments, felt like foreign objects in her hands. She tried to reclaim the narrative, to steer it back into the safe, shallow waters of daytime television. Well, she said, her voice sharp, a forced chuckle in her throat, that certainly got heavy fast. An amazing story, Steven, truly. But let's be real, she leaned in, pressing, her professional cynicism her only remaining weapon. You've made a career, millions of dollars, playing broken men. Are you telling us this isn't just another performance? A very, very convincing one, I'll admit. The audience flinched. The question was too pointed, too cynical, a jarring return to the show's default mode of manufactured conflict. It was a profound misreading of the room. Seagal didn't rise to the bait. He didn't get angry. He simply looked at her, his gaze steady, not with pity, but with a deep, weary understanding. Jenna, he said, his voice calm. Grief doesn't end when the cameras stop rolling. The statement was simple, direct, and devastating. It wasn't an argument, it was a truth. I'm not performing my pain, he continued, his voice low but cutting through her defenses. I'm acknowledging it. Pretending it doesn't exist, smiling for the cameras while you're breaking inside, that would be the performance. Isn't that what your entire industry is built on? The jab was surgical. It wasn't aimed at her personally, but at the entire artifice she represented. Jenna opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in her long, storied career, she had no comeback. She had been completely disarmed, not by a shout, but by a quiet, unassailable truth. Her mask of witty detachment had been gently lifted, and for a moment, everyone saw the person underneath, just as speechless as they were. As Jenna sat in stunned silence, a technical glitch, or perhaps an act of divine intervention, occurred. A producer backstage, fumbling to cue up a standard promotional graphic for the next segment, accidentally triggered the wrong overlay. The massive LED screen behind the set, which had been displaying the show's cheerful logo, suddenly went black. Then, in large, simple white text, a message appeared. It was clearly from the show's live interactive viewer forum. I'm a Marine. Deployed twice. Lost my best friend in Kandahar. I was going to end things tonight. I'm watching this. Hearing Mr. Seagal talk about pain not being weakness, maybe I'll wait. Maybe I'll make it one more day. The entire room inhaled as one. One gasp, hundreds of heartbeats, a single, shared moment of gut-wrenching shock that transcended television. The co-hosts stared, hands over their mouths. Jenna looked up at the screen, and all the color drained from her face. The cynical game she had been playing a moment ago now seemed like a grotesque, childish blasphemy. The stakes had just shifted from ratings and viral moments to life and death. Seagal slowly turned in his chair to face the screen. He read the words, his expression unreadable. He didn't react with shock or surprise. He reacted with a profound stillness, a look of grim, somber recognition, as if he had been expecting this message his entire life. The silent weight of another man's pain had just entered the room, and he was the only one there prepared to carry it. The director screamed in the control room, "Don't cut. Whatever you do, don't you dare cut." Seagal stood up. He didn't look at Jenna, the audience, or the cameras in general. He looked directly into the lens of the main camera, as if he could see through it, through the miles of cable and broadcast signals, into the quiet, desperate room where that Marine was watching. His voice, when he spoke, was not for the studio anymore. It was for an audience of one. "If you're watching," he began, his voice steady, yet carrying the weight of the world, "I don't know your name. I don't know your story. I don't know the specifics of your pain." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "But I know the feeling. I know what it's like to think the fight is over, and you've lost." He glanced at the old black belt on the table. "They give you medals for your service. They give you a folded flag for your friend. But they don't teach you what to do with the silence that comes after. They don't teach you how to carry the ghosts." A hush had fallen over the studio, so complete it felt sacred. "I'm not going to give you a platitude," Seagal continued, his voice raw with an empathy that could only be born from shared experience. "I'm not going to tell you it gets easier. But I will tell you this, you are still here. You are still breathing. The fact that you typed that message means the fighter inside you isn't done yet." He took a step closer to the camera, as if to close the impossible distance. "Don't walk away from this world. Not yet. Your fight isn't over. Your duty now is to survive. Survive today. And then do it again tomorrow. Stay standing." The words weren't a plea. They were a command from one warrior to another. And in that moment, the hot seat stopped being a talk show. It became a lifeline. The screen behind him faded to black. The show's producers, for once, did the right thing and cut to a silent, black commercial break. No one in the studio moved. No one spoke. Then, slowly, one by one, the audience rose to their feet. It wasn't the thunderous, whooping standing ovation of a typical show. It was a silent, solemn, powerful act of respect. They stood in shared, profound stillness, not for an actor, but for the man who had just bared his soul to save another. Whoopi, no, Jenna, remained seated, her note cards forgotten. She looked at Seagal, who had returned to his chair, her expression stripped of all its usual artifice. "You didn't come here to win an argument, did you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Seagal shook his head slowly. "I came because I hoped someone was listening who needed to hear that they weren't alone." Finally, Jenna stood up, too. Not to reclaim her stage, but simply because, in a moment of such profound truth, she could no longer remain seated. Seagal didn't stay for the post-show pleasantries. He stood, gave a single, almost imperceptible nod to the silent, standing audience, and then walked off the set. He left the dog tag around his neck, but he left the old, frayed black belt resting on the coffee table. A silent offering. A testament. As he disappeared backstage, the image left behind, the empty chair, the worn belt, spoke louder than any witty closing line ever could. The show was over, but the lesson had just begun. Sometimes, the most powerful truths are spoken in the quietest voices. Steven Seagal walked onto a stage built for conflict and, with raw honesty, transformed it into a space for healing. He reminded us that our scars are not weaknesses, but proof that we have survived. His story, and the life it may have saved, is a testament to the power of authentic human connection. What does it mean to you to carry your pain with honor? Share your thoughts on strength and vulnerability in the comments below. Show your respect for those who have the courage to be real in a world that often demands a performance. Please like, share, and subscribe for more stories that matter.